Hello everybody. Today is the 17th of September 2003 and we are beginning a new series which is really a continuation in the book Esoteric Psychology Volume 2. This is called The Techniques of Fusion and Duality. And we have been dealing, as you know, with the techniques of integration and the aggregated process, alignment, crisis, light, revelation, and integration. There are a lot of similarities between the integration process and the fusion process. I think the fusion process simply takes the integration process a bit further, and especially in terms of consciousness. But at the same time, we find that the climactic phases of the technique of integration and those of the technique of fusion are similar in some ways, because we have the fusion of the soul and personality rays, and the personality ray becoming a subray of the soul. At some point I've done the horizontal analysis of this particular tabulation that I assembled, but I'd like to do the vertical at some point and discuss the various ways in which the integration of the personality occurs for the different ray types, how there are crises, how alignment is achieved, the method of alignment. It's different in some senses, but it almost always involves a centering within the consciousness of the aspirant, how the crises differ, how the different forms of light break forth, and what they're called. For instance, in the first ray type we have the light which shocks, and in the fourth ray type, for soul, we have the light of victory breaking forth. What is the difference in the revelations? We'll do this sometime. And the methods, finally, how integration occurs. I'm just going to go slowly here, so you can freeze your screen if you wish at some point, and just study the contrasts between these different phases in the aggregated process. All of us will be going through, or will have gone through, one or other of these phases at a certain point in our evolution. Perhaps we are passing through that right at this very time. They will not all be occurring simultaneously, but neither are they entirely sequential. The idea that there is a complete sequence between alignment, followed by crisis, followed by light, followed by revelation, followed by integration, well, there are overlaps in all of these. So you will have a chance to review this and perhaps do a screen capture if you like, and print these. But they will also be on the Makara website before long, and you will be able to study in that way, hopefully. Well, let's see if we can begin to discriminate between what is fusion, the technique of fusion, and and how it differs, and in what way it differs from the technique of integration. The techniques of duality, technique of duality comes a bit later in the process and kind of reminds us of the whole antakarana process, which eventually unites the monad and the soul-infused personality. So the techniques of fusion and duality. We come now to the consideration of a very practical matter where the world disciples are concerned. Well, what are world disciples? Whoops. That's not the one, is it? So what are world disciples? By world disciples, does he mean an initiate of the third degree, or simply the disciples in the world at this time? Maybe the latter is more likely. So we come now to consideration of a very practical matter where the world disciples are concerned, and one with which I intend to deal very simply. Sometimes the very simplicity of the method makes it more difficult to understand, strangely enough. The point which we are to study is the technique of fusion, leading, as it inevitably does, to the emergence into controlling prominence of the ray of the personality. And, that may seem a strange thing to say, because we've already been through the phase of earlier personality integration when we had the dominant personality for 3 lives, sometimes 7 lives, and occasionally 11 lives, and that the technique of integration cannot be applied unless there is a rapidly integrating personality already. So it seems that we've already had this emergence into controlling prominence of the personality ray, except that we must consider this in a special light. And I would suggest the following. Controlling prominence of the personality ray as a subray of the soul ray. So not only in its own right and along its own line of expression, but principally expressing the soul ray in its own unique way. So we might have a secondary soul involved, of course, for so many of us, but the manner of its expression in the world through a prominent personality will be along the personality line. And yet the personality ray will be the means. Will be the means, and the soul ray the end. Ends and means. So the method of expression will be that of the personality ray, but the goal of the expression will be to express the soul ray by a particular means. So the goal is to express the soul ray by a particular means. So all of us, we are probably by this time fairly aware of what our soul ray and personality ray may be, and we want to note the degree to which they have blended. Are they at war? Are they pulling in different directions? Do we have a battle on our hands here with the personality ray seeking to go in a certain direction and the soul ray inclining in a different direction? Or is there, by the personality ray, a kind of acquiescence, so that the direction of the personality ray is primarily guided by the overarching direction of the soul ray? So the emergence into controlling prominence of the ray of the personality always used to puzzle me when I would read that, but it seems in a way obvious that it's a special kind of emergence and not the emergence of a wayward personality ray. Okay, this is not emergence of a wayward personality ray. But the personality ray here in the techniques of fusion is the servant of the soul ray, and the deeper objective, the deeper motive will always be that of the soul, correlated with the type of energy that is expressing through the soul ray. Then further, after a brief study of this, we will briefly refer to the technique of duality, and I would say, very briefly, when you see what he says. The brevity is necessary because only disciples of some experience and initiates will comprehend the things of whereof I speak, and according to the that's the way to spell it, isn't it? According to the law of economy, DK does not want to waste energy. But perhaps there are some for whom these words will have a growing significance. A study of the technique of duality would serve to elucidate the relationship which should exist between the two rays of manifesting energy, which constitute that phenomenal being we call man. So he seems to connect this with the soul ray, the technique of duality, of duality, with the relationship of the soul and personality ray, but also I think the antikarana is involved. We can see. Since we're going to be dealing with the technique of duality, we might as well make it one of our abbreviations. Technique of duality. Maybe one day you'll like to do this too. You know, I've been doing so many commentaries in the written or spoken form that it helps to have. The only pain is to first of all find the proper abbreviation, and then of course remember it. And then occasionally it pops up at odd times when you think you're typing something else and something totally unrelated will pop up in an abbreviation you've just typed. But okay, I think it's worth it. So a study of the technique of duality would serve to elucidate the relationship which should exist. So this suggests a very complete merging, I would say, between the soul ray and personality ray. And of course, when you think about it, the ray of the spiritual triad, at least the secondary ray of the spiritual triad, is really the same as the soul ray. So even though we are relating to the higher ego, which is the spiritual triad, it's pretty much dealing with the same two rays. I mean, the ray of the monad is also involved in the one of the triadal rays, perhaps the more permanent of the triadal foci. But every permanent atom within the spiritual triad is controlled by the same ray, and that same ray is the ray of the soul ray, which means that the permanent atoms of the spiritual triad will change ray every time the soul changes ray. Now, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Suffice it to say, if the soul ray has changed, the ray of the permanent atom of the spiritual triad will have changed too. Sometimes I think it all begins with the monad. All of these changes in the lower worlds. But I think a new aspect of the teaching will have to emerge before we can, be sure of that. Therefore, it will be apparent to you from the start how necessary it will be to deal with these abstruse subjects in the simplest way. I think what DK wants to avoid is overcomplication, which can lead to confusion. So, avoiding overcomplication, leading to confusion. Well, Master Moria has said, well, which would you prefer to do, to complicate or to simplify? And he says everybody knows that the final goal is to simplify. And in the same respect, simplicity is considered to be one of the final soul qualities to be achieved. And when Roberto Assagioli was using the technique of evocative words, simplicity was considered to be one of the highest. The simplicity of the initiate. Sometimes I think you have to go through it's kind of maybe a third-ray, fifth-ray bias here, but go through some pretty intricate analysis before you can simplify in the right manner. But that may be just my approach. Our study of the techniques of integration was definitely abstruse and couched in language quite symbolic. Did we think so as we studied it? I suspect we did. We were there dealing with the relationship of 5 rays, those of the personality of the ego or soul, and of the rays of the 3 personality vehicles prior to their integration into a functioning whole. Well, again, even with the techniques of integration, we were not dealing with the emergence of a independent personality ray, but with a personality energy system which was increasingly correlated with the soul's energy system. And, when we've studied the charts, we certainly do see that on the higher mental plane, that which we normally call the soul has its own type of energy system, structure, relationships, and so forth. An increasing correlation on the level of energy and activity is what we achieve with integration, and it will also have effects in consciousness. But as we go on to the techniques of fusion, the personality's consciousness definitely does become the consciousness of the soul. Of course, all of that is really the consciousness of the monad, and it's an ever-widening consciousness of the immersed monad. At first, the immersed monad, long, long ago, may have only the consciousness of the mineral kingdom. It's extremely confined. It would be a desperate situation were it not for the fact that the monad stays at home even as it goes forth. So one day it will be revealed to us that even though we imagine that we have a limited consciousness, simultaneously with this limitation, we have a very full consciousness on the monadic plane. Simultaneous, multi-leveled consciousness. I guess we have to experience that before the words will mean very much to us. So we go on. It might be of value here if I pointed out to you that the three words, integration, fusion, and duality, when dealt with as they are in connection with the final stages of the path of evolution, are significantly different. All right. Well, at least we know, at least we know that we are dealing with final stages, even when dealing with the techniques of integration. Not just the creation of a selfish personality. That selfish personality already exists when the techniques of integration are begun. So the soul and its ray can only be applied really to an already integrated personality. At least 4 factors are either integrated or integrating. And that, of course, is something of a puzzle, There are different stages of personality integration, and as I've been trying to suggest, the real integration of the personality with the soul is probably, in other words, the two energy systems being totally coherent and with each other and responsive to each other, is probably occurring around the period of the 4th initiation. There will always be room for personality improvement until then, and until then, the matter of the personality vehicles is not yet entirely atomic. When that matter is entirely atomic in all the personality vehicles, then you will have a completely integrated soul personality system. So when the matter of the personality vehicles is entirely atomic, you will have a completely integrated soul personality system. Of course, the time will come when, like the 5th ray, we'll be able to look at these things directly, clairvoyantly, measure these things, and be able to see, not only experience the interaction, but see more objectively what is happening when these two energy systems come together. We do know that when they do come together via an alignment, and that alignment generally occurs because we've somehow heard that still small voice of the soul and done something about it. When that alignment comes about, there's going to be a crisis, and when that crisis comes about, we're going to see more, and eventually we see so much that we have a revelation about the wholeness of things and where we fit. And that is an initiate state, and only then is there completed integration. Meanwhile, there's always quite occasionally anyway, a contrast between the direction of the soul and the prevailing mood or orientation of the personality. So, different stages of the path, final stages of the path of evolution, but he says significantly different. I'm always trying to find some of the similarities here between these techniques. We do know they are progressive, but overlapping at the same time. All right, I just want to, with final stages. Okay, so let's look at this. The technique of integration, a sevenfold technique, is applied upon the path of probation. Well, I would say yes at first, and in a way at first, and then continued. I mean, if you think about this, look at this integration technique for the fifth ray, let us say. Let's go there for a moment. Maybe I can find this here. Gratefully well. Okay. Well. Techniques of integration of the personality, and let's see. So here we are. I finally found it, and take a look at the climax of the Ray 5 technique of integration. Finally understanding the one behind the forms, the true life. The aspirant here is told, then use the forms, which then will neither veil nor hide the self, or will permit the nature of that self to penetrate the veils of life, revealing all the radiance of God, His power and magnetism, revealing all there is of form, of life, of beauty, and usefulness. Then the climax, the mind reveals the one. The mind can blend and fuse the form and life. Thou art the one. Thou art the form. Thou art the mind. Know this. These realizations have more to do, in my view, with the third initiation and beyond than strictly those on the path of integration or the path of probation. Path of probation. So, but although these techniques can begin to be applied, I would say, as obviously as the Tibetan says, upon the path of probation, they do have some pretty powerful climactic results. See, so also for the technique of integration, it's the fusion of the personality and soul ray which is occurring. So here is what I wanted to insert at this point. It's rather large, I realize. Let's see. There we go. It is at this moment of integration as the result of revelation that there comes the fusion of the personality ray with the egoic ray. So my question was here, is the climax of the fusion process the same as the climax of the integration process? Or is this fusion that occurs at the moment of integration just the predecessor of what's called the emergence into prominence of the personality ray, probably as a sub-ray of the soul? So if we have here, if this technique of integration, a sevenfold technique, is applied on the path of probation, it certainly doesn't end there, because if you have a fusion of the personality ray and the soul ray, then we are well beyond the probationary path. So it probably is a technique that is applied over a number of lives, I would suspect. Yes. So the technique of fusion is applied upon the path of discipleship and is strongly a matter of the fusion of the consciousness of the soul and personality. I like to think of when it comes to integration, I think of the merging of the energy systems of the soul and personality, and this would mean that the personality ray and soul ray merge. But when it comes to fusion, I think we're dealing with some deeper matters. The technique of duality is applied upon the path of initiation, and this does suggest the coming into continuous use of the antikarana and the connection of the spiritual triad directly with the soul-infused personality. Okay. Soul incarnation and soul-infused personality. Okay. All right, so as DK says, at different stages upon the path, these techniques are applied. I can certainly see where the technique of fusion cannot be readily applied to the probationer, but it seems to me as well that the technique of integration is a technique with a large span of different involving different states, and that some of the later stages will take us all the way to the third degree, which is the moment of true integration of the soul with the personality, and even beyond. At least this is my present theory. I do see the applicability of some of these stanzas to the later stages of evolution. Yes, and some of them, though, it's interesting. Some of them are a little bit more personal and have many admonitions, even up to the end of the stanza. And some of them deal with quite a climax, even in the technique of integration, such as the second ray technique, which suggests I at the point sustain, I at the point attract, I at the point direct and choose and dominate, I at the point love all, drawing them to the center and moving forward with the traveling points of light towards that great center where the one point stands. So this is, in a way, integration into the hierarchy and with the destination of Shambhala. Quite an advanced state, I would say. So what I'm saying is that we cannot say, we're not treading the path of probation anymore. Although we could ask, are we treading the path of probation? Does the path of probation perhaps last until the path of accepted discipleship? And do we know that we are definitely accepted disciples? So maybe in a sense we are treading the path of probation. But, some people will say, well, I'm not treading the path of probation, therefore I don't need to worry about these techniques of integration. And all I would like to say is that they do go on for quite a span of development and suggest some pretty high stages which are achieved. Okay, I am here using these terms only in relation to what we call the Aryan race, or to what might be more adequately called the Aryan consciousness. Yes, it's not, when he talks about the Aryan race, he's not talking about the rather twisted, selfish, perverted use of the term used by the Axis powers, especially Germany, during the Second World War and preceding it. So the Aryan consciousness, the mentally focused consciousness, the consciousness which can become characterized by the soul-infused mind, by the revelations of the soul-infused mind. So these techniques of integration, fusion, duality, I think they have a lot of the fifth ray involved, and we're dealing with the fifth root race, or the Aryan root race, and more specifically with the Aryan consciousness. So interestingly enough, that the fifth ray, its higher method of teaching, is the new esoteric psychology. So we have to have some different conceptions of the fifth ray than we may have had when considering it more in formal terms. So I'm here using these three terms, the technique of integration, the technique of fusion, technique of duality, only in relation to what we call the Aryan race, because that's when the types of spiritual development we're talking about here can occur. It's only with the Aryan consciousness that we can develop. Only with the Aryan consciousness can we fulfill these three techniques. Okay. For that consciousness demonstrates in a twofold manner as mental power and personality force. And remember that the personality is really integrated on the plane of mind. Personality is integrated on the plane of mind, and involves the mental unit on the fourth subplane of the plane of mind. So when we're talking about mentality and personality, the two pretty much go together. Mentality and personality go together. So it is found, for that consciousness demonstrates in a twofold manner Aryan consciousness as mental power and personality force. There is much integrated power connected with the fifth ray, which distinctly understands through Leo what one is and what one is not, at least at the in a stage which is occurring before identification occurs. There is a distinctness. I am this, I cultivate this, this is my personality, it has certain abilities and qualities, I make it forceful in the world, and through my mental power, that forcefulness is cultivated and reinforced. So it is found at a certain stage in every human being and in every race. It must therefore be remembered that I am not using the word Aryan as synonymous with Nordic, but as descriptive of the intellectual goal of humanity. We can say that there's a special subrace known as the Aryan branch of the fifth root race, but to a certain extent the entire fifth root race and the type of consciousness that it has been cultivating these million years or more is the Aryan consciousness, and mental power is developed, personality force is developed, and the power to recognize the soul upon the fifth plane through the mind, the fifth principle. The mind is used to recognize the higher mental nature, the consciousness on the higher mental plane, which so often limiting the term we call soul. So I'm not using, he says, the word Aryan as synonymous with Nordic, but as descriptive of the intellectual goal of humanity at the present time, of which our Occidental civilization is in the early stages. Here in the Occident, we have not yet even reached the stage of true intellectual consciousness, as that consciousness is considered a goal of the fifth root race. but which men of all time and all races have individually demonstrated. Now we're talking about a wider possible demonstration, which will come to fruition during this fifth root race, but in Atlantean times and Lemurian times, strange as it may seem, there were those who exhibited the Aryan consciousness. Even in Atlantean times and Lemurian, there were those who expressed the Aryan consciousness. Strange as that may seem, but of course they had a head start, those individuals, having been individualized on the moon chain or even earlier in the previous solar system. The Aryan state of consciousness is one into which all men eventually pass, regardless of the root race. There may be some in the next root race who are entering the Aryan consciousness, and yet the root race, the sixth root race, will probably be called something quite different. It will be a root race given to the cultivation of the intuition. So this Aryan consciousness is cognizant of that center on the higher mental plane we call the soul. We can say that the true Aryan consciousness is cognizant of that center on the higher mental plane, which we call the soul. Eventually it will be so. So integration here refers to the bringing into one field of resultant magnetic activity of 5 differing types of energy. This is such a good way of expressing it. Bringing into one field of resultant magnetic interplaying energy and magnetic activity, 5 different types of energy. So, and we have different definitions of integration as we go along. Physical and emotional sentient energy. 2 energies, therefore, are brought together and eventually form one expressive force. If the energy is targeted and directed, it becomes a force. Sometimes, there's ambiguity in discussing what's an energy, what's a force. What is a force? Generally, we think that the energy is of a higher caliber, and it generally is, and a force having to do with a lower energy center. For instance, soul energy, personality force. But there's also the Shambhala force, and what it means is that the Shambhala energy is specifically directed or targeted into a lower form. So if an energy is targeted, if an energy is targeted and directed, it becomes a force. This is another way of thinking about it. So let's just say force is channeled generally into or towards a lower form of energy. All right, so integration here refers, and integration here, it might refer to something different somewhere else, to the bringing into one field of resultant magnetic activity the 5 different types of energy. And I've talked about, the merging of 2 energy systems and their interplay and interaction and mutual responsiveness. There is a sense in which the consciousness on the higher mental plane becomes increasingly attentive to and responsive to that which arises within the personality. It's the Mercurian interplay in the Geminian field of the 2 brothers, the soul and the personality. So there is physical and emotional sentient energy, and they form one expressive force. Physical, emotional, sentient, and I see here that this should be, there should be a little dash there, really. Physical, emotional, sentient, and mental energy, three, they are brought into relationship, are also brought into relationship. One potent vortex of force is then set up, which eventually becomes so systematized and integrated that we call its aggregated expression personality. So, and let's just say that this is another great definition of personality. So, another, okay, great definition of personality. All right, I think it's time to make that red. Right, so, and this actually should be copied. We're on page 380, and in time this aggregate becomes a realized potency and thus completes the fourfold lower man. So I want to, at the risk of detaining you just a short time, personality definition, and go here to the AAB extracts and make sure that it is there. Personality definition. Right, physical, emotional, sentient, and mental energy, three of them together, are also brought into relationship. One potent vortex of force is then set up, which eventually becomes so systematized, coordinated, organized, and integrated that we call its aggregated expression personality. And that's number four. And in time, this aggregate becomes a realized potency and thus completes the fourfold lower man. I suppose it emerges over time as a realized potency. I think the thing to do here, though, is to go back here to, right, that over time it emerges as a realized potency. So, right, and let's just say here, over time. It takes time. None of this is going to happen in one life period, but the systematization and the integration becomes more solid and more complete, and then personality emerges. Personality is related to the number 4 with all of its conflicts. Personality related to the number 4 and all the conflicts associated with that number. These 4 types of energy are then brought into relationship with the ego or soul. He's really repeating for us what we already know, but it helps to have these statements brought into connection with each other repeatedly, so we really get the idea. This brings then into play another and higher type of energy expression, and thus the 5 energies integrate, blend, and fuse. So there is such a thing as the integration of the personality with the soul, and not just within itself or as itself. Right. So when the term integrated personality is used, so often the presence of the soul is required. When the term integrated personality is used, the presence and infusion of the soul is implied. These 5 energies, when rightly related to each other, this is one of those synthetic sections of the book which is so important for us to grasp this understanding. These five energies, when rightly related to each other, produce one active force center through which the monad can work. This is the soul-infused personality as the instrument of the monad. We can pause and question, are we that? Is there any way that pure being, this great and higher sacrificial center, can work through our spiritualized, soul-integrated personality? Okay. So when rightly related to each other, and I suppose this really implies minimally the third degree, this implies minimally the third degree, produce one active force center. Without those pauses, hesitations, delays in interactivity, without pauses, hesitations, and delays in interactivity, a rather spontaneous interaction of all five together. One active force center through which the monad can work. Using the word monad to express the first differentiation of the one life, if such a paradoxical phrase can be employed. It's an apparent differentiation only. This is an apparent differentiation and not an essential one. Because, ultimately, and this is even more paradoxical, the one cannot be divided, and yet apparently it is. So there is no divisibility of the essence, and yet, as Master Mora tells us, there is, for practical purposes, the divisibility of the spirit. So, using the word monad to express the first differentiation of the one life. We are distinct, and yet essentially we are not. Its use is only permissible from the standpoint of the personal self, still limited and imprisoned in the I consciousness, and I think we need to understand this. We need to understand that ahamkara is a prison. And its activity fragments the consciousness. So there may be variety, but there is not difference. I wonder if that makes sense. So there may be, for practical purposes, variety, but there is no real difference. And that's something we could really ponder on. The technique of fusion deals with the production of a close interplay of the five above enumerated aspects of energy, which have been in due time integrated into a unity. So let's just say the approach. Okay, the approach of the two energy systems is furthered by the technique of fusion. Now, as I say, it seems in a way quite furthered even in the technique of integration. Even with the technique of integration, there is fusion of the two rays and their interplay, but perhaps not so complete an interplay. Well, if we look at this, what we looked at before, the integration is the result of revelation. There comes the fusion of the personality ray and the egoic ray. But perhaps it is possible to take things beyond this fusion. Perhaps it is possible to take the interplay of the two systems, soul and personality, beyond this fusion here discussed. So, what do we get the idea of here? I would say we get the idea of continuation. The continuation of a process from the technique of integration to the technique of fusion. We see a continuing process. So the close interplay of the five, which have been at least brought into the condition where interplay is possible. What we have then is the close interplay of the five, which have been brought into a relationship in which interplay is possible. So, in fusion, we have an increasing interplay until the fourth initiation. FR, fourth initiation. It is really a fusion of four forces and one energy. And of course the energy is, what is it? This energy is the soul energy. So we get the idea of continuity. The technique of integration at least brings these five together so that an initial interplay can become an ever more complete interplay, an ever more complete fusion. So let's just say the technique of integration at least brings the five together, producing a fusion of the two rays and the possibility of an ever growing interplay. Now you kind of wonder what does happen to the personality ray when the causal body is destroyed. And we might say that in a sense it is the ego, the true ego, which becomes the personality of the monad. But still there is another possibility. A personality is produced via the Maya Varupa, or that will-created body. The MVR shows or demonstrates a personality. It is the production of the spiritual triad, and yet it manifests in the three lower worlds. So, will the personality it appears to manifest have the same ray as heretofore? That's an interesting question. Suppose you had a certain ray. Let's say you had, when you took the fourth initiation, you had a certain personality ray. When, after that point, the personality is manifested through a Maya Virupa, will it demonstrate the same ray qualities as it had when the fourth initiation was taken? Or suppose you took the fourth initiation and you did not die, or you did not lose your physical vehicle, which is also possible. The fourth and fifth can be taken maybe in the same life, the same incarnation. So it was sustained. Then there is, of course, a relationship between the spiritual triad and the personality directly. Is the personality ray as it was before that initiation retained? So I think what I'm saying is that this personality ray, because of the mechanism of the Maya Varupa, can be retained longer than we might suspect. Because, now note this, we are told that the Christ has a sixth-ray personality. Sixth ray, SXRYPR. No. Well, he has that. And the Buddha, still, apparently, a first ray personality. We are told Hercules had a second ray personality, but if the Christ presently has a sixth ray personality, what does that mean? Maybe that when there is this Maya Varupa created, which in a way perhaps replicates the personality vehicle that he had at a certain point in his development, it has a ray quality. So my statement here is going to be summary. The Maya Varupic personality has a ray. That's what I'm going to say. And that the personality ray can still continue effectively, even though it's not constituted in the same way, it can continue effectively when the highly advanced ego, a triad, manifests through a Maya Varupa. So anyway, it's really the fusion of four forces and one energy, and that energy is that of the soul, but this is the energy of the soul, which really is the energy of the spiritual triad. And even the ray of the personality persists. Thus, the ray of the personality, no matter how generated, persists even in higher stages of evolution. All right, now what about this fusion? We get the idea, right, that there are three different stages of the path on which these techniques are applied, and roughly considered they are the path of probation for the technique of integration, though it does, as I say, continue bringing the five energies into a relationship where further interplay is possible. Then the technique of fusion is applied upon the path of discipleship, and I suppose, as I say, continues really all the way up to the moment of most complete fusion at the fourth degree, and the technique of duality is applied on the path of initiation, so it may be applied up to the fourth degree and maybe beyond the fourth degree. Is that possible? So, connection of the spiritual triad directly with the personality. Okay. So can it be that the technique of duality is applied even beyond the fourth degree towards the retraction of the antikarana in the stage of mastership? Maybe. And that antikarana in a way could continue in a certain way all the way into the monad itself at the sixth degree. These things are speculations, but I offer them for consideration. So here is the discussion of the coming together of these energies, five of them. When rightly related to each other, they produce a soul integrated personality, or yes, a soul integrated personality of a certain degree. The technique of fusion deals with the production of a close interplay of the 5 enumerated aspects or of energy which we have in due time integrated into a unity. And what are the implications of this? I think some very interesting implications. Implications. That any vehicle can be found in interplay with the soul. And that the soul can manifest through the physical vehicle, through the astral vehicle, through the mental vehicle, though it may have a greater tendency to work through one of these three other than the other two. But still it can express through any one, and it's possible to have your physical vehicle interplaying with the soul, your emotional vehicle interplaying with the soul, a combination of physical and emotional interplaying with the soul, the mental vehicle interplaying with the soul, a combination of mental, emotional, and physical, etheric interplaying with the soul, the entire personality interplaying with the soul. It's one field. And let's just say in fusion, the interplay becomes more intense. In fusion, the interplay in the 5-fold field becomes more and more complete. So there is that type of continuity. Did I, in my earlier discussion, take the technique of integration too far? Well, as I say, there is the merging of the soul ray and the personality ray. It depends on what this merging means. Let's just say in the technique of integration there is a merging of the soul ray and the personality ray, but how complete can this merging become? And maybe the initial stages of merging are not as developed as some final stages of merging. So maybe simply the merging of the soul and personality ray is not the ultimate state. Maybe the merging of the soul ray and the personality ray is not the ultimate state of fusion. Maybe that. Okay. So, now what does the fusion produce? I think we're going to go on and we'll make this a 2-hour program. It seems that once the flow gets going, it's wiser to do that. I know it takes you a little longer to download these things, but my apologies, but there is a certain pressure to bring these forward. This fusion produces a demonstration of personal activity when, so the fusion, which is ongoing and even happening in the stage of the techniques of integration, produces a demonstration of personal activity when, in response to the technique of integration, there is response and interplay between the threefold lower man. Well, this occurred even earlier, right? We had that stage of the dominant personality, 3, 7, or 11 lives, a gradual emergence of the dominant note of the lower man. So fusion is a lengthy and ongoing process and occurs even before the technique of fusion is applied. So there is a demonstration of personality activity in response to the technique of integration. when in response to the technique of integration there is response and interplay between the threefold lower man, and we can say that as the technique of integration is applied, the interplay between the three aspects of the lower man becomes even more complete. I guess we can safely say that. A gradual emergence of the dominant note of the lower man, which in time indicates the nature of the personality array. I suppose we can always wonder, is there a personality note before this, before it emerges noticeably, or not? In other words, when we have an Atlantean man, do we have a personality ray? Or a Lemurian man, or even an early Aryan man who is strictly mental in his approach? Do we have the emergence of a personality ray? Does it exist even if it is not noticed? Does the personality ray exist even if it is not demonstrated in the life? And there are reasons to think yes and reasons to think no. So there is, this is the general, fusion is being treated here as a general process which antedates the techniques of fusion per se. And finally, the quality of the personality ray in its higher aspects, that's important, emerges into living expression. And we might say this occurs during the technique of fusion. He said the emergence of the personality ray. Great beauty of character or great forcefulness will then appear. He pretty well dichotomizes it, you know. On the 1, 3, 5, 7 line, it is forcefulness. On the 2, 4, 6 line, it is beauty of character. The great pairs of opposites, in a certain way, are these two lines when it comes to energy, and epitomized in the contrast between Ray 1 and Ray 2, which are at the head of their respective ray lines. So what we have here, a demonstration of personality activity in fusion. This fusion will produce a demonstration of personality activity in response to the technique of integration, and in response to the technique of integration, these are the things that happen. The threefold lower man is interplaying. The note of the threefold lower man is emerging, and then the higher aspects of that note emerge. Okay. And you know, you would want to stop yourself and say, well, when, in my process, do the higher aspects of my emergent note, my personality ray, emerge? And you know, you can probably identify those moments of the habitual expression of a lower aspect and a now and then infrequent but increasingly frequent emergence of the higher aspects of the personality ray. And with the soul fusion and soul guidance, more and more that will occur, that the higher aspects will emerge. And then we have, you know, exemplary individuals. Now, you know, still going on, still in this ongoing fusion process, we have, gradually, the qualities of the personality energy are transmuted into those of the ego or soul, and the fusion of the two energies, soul and body, is complete. Now, what can this mean? The gradually, well, I'm going to put it in purple. Getting to like purple here, maybe the sign of an impending Seventh ray personality, you never know. Doubtful, but could happen. Gradually, the qualities of the personality energy are transmuted into those of the ego or soul. It's like this, that when the personality ray is manifesting, it is really a vehicle for the manifestation of the soul ray, and is not manifesting on its own. Gradually, the qualities of the personality energy are transmuted into those of the ego or soul. They no longer carry the separative note. The personality energies no longer carry any separative or ahamkaric, ahamkaric. I had it once, note. So they always represent the soul ray. And the fusion of the two energies, soul and body, is then complete. And let's just say there is nothing untransmuted in the personality vehicles which resists the through flow, or the flow through, of the soul ray. And the fusion of the two energies, soul and body. Body here means personality, right? Body, in this context, means personality, is then complete. This technique of fusion might be better understood by all of you if it were called the Technique of Transmutation. Even though transmutation, when compared with transformation and transfiguration, is the lowest of the three, it does have its higher meanings, as we learn, I think, in Rule 10. The transmutation has some triadal meanings, as well as the usual meanings associated with our personality vehicles. So the technique of transmutation, we might say, preparing the personality vehicles for the pervasion by the soul. So vibratory preparation of the personality vehicles to admit the constant presence of the soul through their functioning. Okay. The technique of transmutation. It suggests, it suggests that there is a very strong transmutation that has occurred at the third degree. A strong transmutation has occurred at the third degree. But it must be remembered that the transmutation referred to is not that of bad qualities into good or bad characteristics into good ones, for this should take place definitely upon the path of probation, we might say, when the technique of integration is being applied. But the transmutation of the higher aspects of the personality ray into those of the soul, this is so somehow important, really. The transmutation, the elevation of the higher aspects of the personality ray into really soul qualities. Elevation of the higher aspects of the personality ray into soul qualities. The hitherto personality qualities are now soul qualities. And it is the soul which is expressing through again these personality ray qualities, as if the personality ray were entirely a subray of the soul ray. The transmutation of the higher aspects of the personality ray into those of the soul ray. So let's just say, if I had a fourth ray personality, which sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, which means I do. If I had a fourth ray personality, when it expresses, it is always expressing the second ray soul. If I am a truly soul-infused personality. In other words, that the technique of fusion has really been accomplished within this energy system, then every time the personality ray expresses, it's really expressing the soul. It's not just expressing itself. So, if the technique of fusion has been achieved, then every time the personality expresses, it is really expressing the soul through a certain coloration, a partial veiling, which, however, is useful in application. So when this has been to a great extent carried forward satisfactorily, then the technique of duality comes into play, duality differing greatly from that to which we refer when we speak of higher and lower selves. So, what is being brought into relationship? That is the question. It is the duality which is utilized upon the path of initiation, presumably when the antikarana is really at work, by those who know no sense of separateness. And I would say this involves the monad, because only the monad knows no sense of separateness, and signifies one wherein the transmuted and purified personality qualities and characteristics are used by the initiate in the three worlds for service and furthering the plan. But who is the initiate? And elsewhere we gather that the initiate is really the monad, the one who realizes himself as the monad. And ultimately, since the initiate in a way is not made, the initiate is, the monad is. We'll say that. The initiate is. He is not made. The monad is. It is not made. So you begin to wonder whether this technique of duality, which should involve, I think, the antikarana, doesn't connect us with some kind of monadic identification, because the true initiate has that increasing monadic identification. More and more he realizes himself as being. So it signifies one wherein the transmuted and purified personality qualities and characteristics, and they are, let's call them soul transmuted. The soul under Venus is the transmuting agent. That these purified personality qualities and characteristics are used by the initiate in the three worlds for service and furthering the plan. And now remember here, the angel of the presence stanzas. Always there's discussion of the plan and the whole. The plan and the whole. The third degree are part of these, or suggested by these angel of the present stanzas, and it's at the third degree that one can really begin to know the plan more as it is, rather than as it has been presented by others who are mediators between the disciple and direct knowledge of the plan. And there is a sense too, DK discusses in Raised Initiation how the monad focuses upon the personality and creates a burning ground, like the focus of sunlight through a burning glass, through a magnifying glass. So the monad can be involved also in purifying the personality. We have to remember that the monad can be involved in the purification of the personality as the sun shines through a burning glass, magnifying glass. So this is what is being said of the technique of duality. It's applied upon the path of initiation. The true initiate is the monad, and even the initiate of the third degree realizes increasingly that he is the one. That's what it means to recognize oneself as the monad. To recognize, rain cloud. Recognize oneself as the monad means to recognize oneself as the one. So it's not as if we realize we are some point of light. It's increasingly we find ourselves infusing all contents of consciousness, and what else is there but contents of consciousness? No matter what we perceive, it's a content of consciousness, and we are the one. I am the one, I God. I am the form in which all forms are merged. I am the soul in which all souls are fused. I am the life, and in that life all little lives remain. This realization of oneself as the one is indispensable upon the path of initiation. And one can already begin to get a little taste of it once the divine will has overcome desire, or an aspect of will has overcome desire at the second degree. The egoic energies are only brought into play when needed for group benefit and within the confines, again a paradoxical term, and only of significance in consciousness from the standpoint of lesser minds, of the kingdom of God. So, it is the duality which is utilized upon the path of initiation. We want to bring those points home. Hence pondering, repeating, restating. It is the duality which is utilized upon the path of initiation by those who know no sense of separateness, and it's so easy to fall into the separateness, whether of the mind or the astral body or even the physical body can cause it, and signifies one wherein the transmuted and purified personality qualities and characteristics are used by the initiate. So we have to ask ourselves to what extent are the personality qualities of our personality ray purified, transmuted, elevated, the higher part of ray expression, are used by the initiate in the three worlds for service and the furthering of the plan. The egoic energies are only brought into play when needed for group benefit, and we can say here, never prostituted, for personality acquisition in the lower three worlds. Because it is possible to use soul energies for personal ends. And that must be discontinued. Because that's gray magic, black magic, and so forth. The egoic energies are only brought into play when needed for group benefit and within the confines of the kingdom of God, or recognizing within the recognition. Okay, recognition that all that is beheld is an aspect of the kingdom of God if one had sufficient spiritual discernment. always to detect the presence of that kingdom. All right. Well, these are abstruse matters, as the Tibetan tells us. We really have to ponder on these things, allow them to sink in so that they really mean something to us. And when we're living our normal life process, we can detect these processes functioning within ourselves and within others and within groups, that we can make a connection between what is said in the books and the actual practical life. It will be seen, therefore, that when dealing here with relatively advanced, that we are dealing here with relatively advanced stages of human development. So what I have now to say will veil under extremely simplified phrases, and that's so interesting, not using complexity to veil, but using simplicity as a veil. It can really be done as a veil. Truths which will be apparent to two groups of aspirants. And notice how he equates the term aspirant and disciples. Well, everybody's aspiring, and everybody's learning. We are both, in a way, once we are a disciple, we are both an aspirant and a disciple. When we're simply an aspirant, we may not be yet a disciple. So aspirants and disciples are here equated. Every disciple is also an aspirant, but not all aspirants are disciples, technically considered. So, who are there here? There are accepted disciples who will comprehend the technique, the significance of the technique of fusion. So, to say accepted disciples, at least midway, or usually so, between the first and second initiations. At least that. But, acceptance can come later. It is a question of the relationship between the master and the disciple. So it's interesting, he discusses it. One can technically be a initiate of the second degree and not yet be an accepted disciple. And one can yet be not yet an initiate of the second degree and be an accepted disciple. It has to do with a certain maybe karmic dharmic relationship of the master and the rising disciple. So who will understand these things? And accepted disciples, they will comprehend the significances of the technique of fusion, and initiates, which will mean, really, minimally, of the third degree, who will work with the technique of duality. And in my view, contact the one, the monad, and increasingly know oneself as the one, the monad, pure being. It should be remembered also that we are here dealing with the primordial duality of spirit and matter, and not with the secondary duality of soul and body. This point is of deep importance and will bear most consideration. So the technique of duality refers more to the primary duality of spirit and matter than to the secondary duality of soul and body. Well, in this case, personality represents matter, and monad represents spirit. So we are moving beyond the ahamkara here. We're moving into a state of identification, of unification, of transcending the habitually sustained rings pass not. These rings pass not are broken, and we're entering a much wider sense of pervasion and participation when we're going to use the technique of duality. The technique of duality is all about fusing the apparent dualities into one. It's all about fusing the apparent dualities of the pairs of opposites into one. That's what it's about. The man who will seek excuse me. The man who will seek to use the technique of fusion is the disciple who is conscious of personality power, owing to the fact that his mind is beginning to dominate his sentient emotional nature, much in the same way as his emotional sentient nature has for ages controlled the physical body. The physical body does what the disciple wants. That's what it means there, but now it's something else. The emotions do and behave according to what the disciple wills them to do. The mind here being the agent of the will. So this is a powerful personality with a powerful mind, which is beginning to dominate the emotional sentient nature, so the will of the soul is being expressed. The soul is being expressed. Much in the same way as his emotional sentient nature has for ages, millions of years really, even from the Atlantean period, controlled his physical body. The soul-infused mind is in the driver's seat at this point. Soul-infused, let's see how we could do that, S-L-I, soul-infused mind is the director of the irrational aspects of the personality. The use of the mind is becoming second nature. And what do we mean by that? Generally habitual to certain advanced types of men, and it is called into play when they reach this stage almost automatically. So mind is a spontaneous expression, and the personality is powerful, and its higher aspects are recognized. Recognized. No. Okay, recognized. Yes, its higher aspects are recognized. So it's important here to know who will use this technique. I mean, just because we study it doesn't necessarily mean we can use it. And yes, the mind is used automatically at this stage, and the result is that integration of the three energies is proceeding fast. Well, even before, even when the technique of integration was to be applied as a soul, or by the soul, the three energies were being rapidly integrated. So you see what I mean, that sometimes the same things seem to be said of the technique of integration and the technique of fusion. In our studies of occultism, we divide things up with the mind, but the mind cannot capture this organic, growing, overlapping, simultaneous process we call unfoldment. We can fix our mind upon the process before our eyes and try to identify it and label it and fix it, but it doesn't really capture what is happening. We try to frame it, you know. We find the many frames make one motion picture. But this motion picture really has no divisions, and we are trying to make frames out of this organic unfoldment. Those are some of the limitations of the mind, which attempts to freeze reality in time, when the unfoldment is much more seamless, shall we say. So the result is that the integration of the three energies is proceeding fast, the three energies of the personality. We're not talking about monad here, and the soul. At the same time, the man is definitely oriented to soul contact and knowledge, but also this is the case during the later phases of the technique of integration, and frequently the mind, when it is the controlling personality factor, is itself brought suddenly and dynamically under the control of the soul. Let's read that again. The mind who will seek, the man, man in mind, the man who will seek to use the technique of fusion is the disciple who is conscious of personality power, owing to the fact that his mind is beginning to dominate his sentient emotional nature, much in the same way as his emotional sentient nature has for ages controlled the physical body. The use of the mind is becoming second nature to certain advanced types of men. So a strong mental focus, but not yet necessarily full mental polarization. And it is called into play when they reach this stage almost automatically. To think is an automatic process. It's not a laborious conscious process. So to think is an automatic process. The result is that the integration of the three energies is proceeding fast. Even as he says, the technique of integration is applied by the soul to the rapidly integrating personality. See, because we have the rapidly integrating personality. And at the same time, the man is definitely oriented to soul contact and knowledge, which was not the case at the beginning of the techniques of integration. And I think that should be noted. This was not the case at the beginning of the techniques of integration. And frequently the mind, when it is the controlling personality factor, maybe it's not always so, it depends on the rays to a certain extent. The intuition might be more controlling factor for some types, at least incipient intuition. And frequently the mind, when it is the controlling personality factor, is itself brought suddenly and dynamically under the control of the soul. So what do we have then? We would then have the soul-infused mind. This accounts for the intense difficulty of the life of every disciple at this stage. We would say, call this the stage of fusion. Several processes are simultaneously going on, and this can create cross currents when different processes are going on at the same time. The mind factor is steadily becoming more dominant, increasingly clarified and usable at the stage when the technique of fusion can be applied. The three aspects of the lower nature are working in closer, ever closer, unity all the time, each growing at the same time in individual potency. So ever closer interplay between the aspects, or let's say three aspects of the personality. The personality ray is making its presence felt, and the expressed power of the man within his environment is equally present. I guess it's also possible that the personality ray can be present, but not make its presence felt, cannot be, is not sufficiently radiatory, is not strong enough to be noticed or impressed upon others or the environment. Right, that's also possible. So what's happening here? This is causing difficulty at the stage of fusion. We're just trying to see, who are the people to whom this can be applied. And the soul ray is at times projecting itself. And this produces in the early stages those difficult upsets and turmoils, which are usually of a distressing kind. So soul ray projection, let's get that straight. Soul ray projection is disturbing to the personality and to its environment. How interesting. Wow, what a great science this is, the science of esoteric psychology, and how much it will help explain spiritually developing people to themselves. Maybe when things die down a little bit and we're not in such a period of extreme existential stress as humanity now finds itself. So it is at this stage, therefore, that the technique of fusion can profitably be used. And let's review. Mind factor, steadily more dominant. The three aspects of the lower nature working in ever closer unity all the time. The personality ray making its presence felt. And the soul ray projecting itself. Now, how many of these stages relate to the utilization of the technique of integration by the soul? Well, if we end the integration with the fusion of the personality ray and the soul ray, then some of these stages must also be in effect. Well, the point is the technique of integration begins much earlier than the technique of fusion. You have to have a pretty well integrated personality, all five aspects brought together into one field. Let's reassert that. When all five aspects of the soul personality are brought together into one interplaying field, then the technique of fusion can be applied. So we want to see for whom this is really relevant, because DK has said these are rather advanced methods of meditation that he's going to give us here, isolated unity, inclusive reason, presented attributes. These are high states and involve someone who is in possession of an impersonal revelation and who is integrated enough to do something about that revelation, to express it. So we'll keep the distinctions in mind and also the continuity which exists between these stages. It is at this stage, therefore, that the technique of fusion can profitably be used. I suppose some use it prematurely, preserving at the same time the realized integrity of the motive, which, if correctly apprehended, should be. So we need to preserve realized integrity of motive during the fusion process, the motive of a realized objective of soul control in response to living reaction to its sensed call or pull. So let the soul control the outer form and life in all events. Outer form and life and all events. and bring to light the love which underlies the happenings of the time. So the realized objective of soul control, this is, while the fusion is occurring, this motive is very important, and the motive of service in response to a sentient realization of humanity's need. So we have control, service, and the motive of cooperation with the plan in response to an intelligent appreciation of its nature and essence. I think he's just given us, so these are the three rays applied to motive during the stage in which the technique of fusion is being used. All right, the motive of a realized objective of soul control, that's the first ray. The motive of service, sentiency, that's the second ray. The motive of cooperation with the plan, which is intelligent activity, the activity aspects, the third ray, in response to an intelligent appreciation of its nature and existence. So when the technique of fusion is being used, soul control is the objective, service is the objective, cooperation with the plan is the objective. So this is not just about getting oneself together, is it? This technique of fusion is not just about, in the old slang, getting oneself together. It is higher, it is more. It suggests that one is a soul affected and is expressing the soul to some extent in service according to the plan as understood, and lives a life which is increasingly under the control of the soul. Well, let it sink in. We're going slowly, but let it sink in. I'm letting it sink into my consciousness. I've been teaching this for 25 years, and maybe I'm almost getting to the point where I can realize what it all means. All right, we continue. Again, you will note that we have swung back to our three major themes: soul control, service, and the plan. He gives us this triplicity. The plan, conceived on the atmic plane, is in a way related to the third ray, but the first as well. The atmic plane is the third plane, and yet the first of the Brahmic planes. Service has to do with responding to the sense need, thus to the sentiency of the second aspect, and control is always the theme of the first ray, control according to the will. It might therefore seem that this particular technique will be a sevenfold one, like the technique of integration, but in this you would be mistaken. Interesting, the Trinity is emerging now over the septonate. Well, you get up to the realm of the monad and you say, well, isn't the monad Trinitarian? I mean, in a way, yes, but there's a septonate there as well. So in relation to the soul, there's a septonate and a trinity. In relation to the monad, there's a septonate and a trinity. It is a threefold technique based upon the fact that all souls are eventually divided. You can't really divide soul. You can't really divide consciousness, but it's the mind that wants to do the division, right? Again, a paradoxical phrase when dealing with souls, but what can be done when modern language proves inadequate to the demands of soul knowledge? Modern language, what can we say, born of the concrete mind, proves inadequate to the demands of soul knowledge. Maybe, these words will come about, but he tells us that the higher initiations don't even involve words at all, unless the word simply as a standalone symbol, perhaps, but not descriptiveness in terms of words. But what can be done when modern language proves inadequate to the demands of soul knowledge? So that all souls are eventually divided into three major groups. Eventually. and there's so much hidden in that word eventually, or rather distinguished by three major qualities. Those are the first, second, and third rays. True of all souls, and true also of all monads, eventually. And I've been theorizing that even the logoic plane may be involved with the liberated monad, known alchemically as the volatile essence, the essence which wants to fly back to its source. Life, the one life, manifests through these three major qualities which condition its sevenfold appearance, also conditioned by the seven rays, and which are essentially will, love, and intelligence. Well, there are just so many of these sevens going to three, sevens going to three, sevens going to three. The structure of the Kabbalah is always present, the greater three hovering above the seven. This is, as I say, operating particularly on two levels. We might consider it the soul in relation to the spiritual triad, and the seven monadic types on the monadic plane in relation to the three supertypes, perhaps finding their origin on the logoic plane. It's not much discussed that the monad can turn logoic, but so it must be, if it's to take the journeys which begin on the cosmic physical plane and go to higher cosmic planes. It has to pass through the logoic plane. And beings like the Christ and the Buddha are monads, yes, but they're also on the logoic plane, so what have they done with their vehicles? Preserve them, perhaps, in some way? Preserve the monadic vehicle? There comes a point when the monadic vehicle, as a temple, has to be destroyed. When is that point? It may be, perhaps, at the ninth initiation, or it could be sooner. At the ninth initiation, there is a refusal to become engaged with or continue one's association with the cosmic physical plane. And without a monadic vehicle, maybe one just can't do that. Well, those are matters that remain to be revealed at initiations higher than we can conceive with any clarity. This, so will, love, and intelligence, it's a threefold technique. It is a threefold technique. And I'm just going to make that quite big because it's so important to remember. Threefold technique. And when we work with the meditations as suggested, we're going to work with one of three methods. We perhaps, as we do have done in the University of the Seven Rays and now in the Moria Federation, we try all three, try them on, see how they work for us, because we contain all the three aspects. Everybody has to realize isolated unity, even if they're not on the first ray line. Everybody has to realize to some extent inclusive reason and the intuition, even if not on the second ray line. And everybody has to present attributes on behalf of the plan, even if not on the third ray line. So we have to be careful of the exclusivity of the mind, that you're this and only this, because there's a lot of overlapping in these trinities. Life, the one life, manifests through these three qualities which condition its sevenfold appearance, and which are essentially will, love, and intelligence. Okay. Going on a little further, this technique of fusion evokes these three qualities in relation to the soul, to service, and the plan. That's the Trinity, and we remember we use the word, remember, soul, control. Soul, the service, and the plan. At the same time, it brings illumination to the mind, thus revealing the soul in the kingdom of God. It brings increased imagination, creative and dynamic, to the emotional-sentient nature, the astral body, thus revealing relationship and responsibility. Okay, we see through our imagination our relationships, our relationships. Through our imagination, our relationships. It brings likewise inspiration to the physical life, to the physical body, via the brain, revealing actual capacity to cooperate intelligently with the plan. That means to etherically receive and express the higher energies. Therefore, we shall have to consider a technique which will do three things. Okay, so the technique of fusion evokes these three qualities: will, love, and intelligence. Maybe worth expanding a little bit. Okay, will, love, and intelligence. At the same time, to all, and not just to exclusive ray types, to all, but to some more than others. It brings illumination, okay, and it brings increased imagination, and it brings increased inspiration. Now, I find this interesting, the word inspiration, to the physical life. This definitely connects. FL definitely connects to Sagittarius. And can you see how? Because in the meditative sequence, Sagittarius rules inspiration, and also, of the three fire signs, the physical body. So when we reach that Sagittarian point, inspiration comes through. It also rules the higher mind, interestingly enough. And the etheric body is charged with the energies of the triad. And so it is possible to live, the plan is vital, and it's possible to live the vitality of the plan. The plan is vital, and when inspired, it is possible to live the vitality of the divine plan, and really become a very effective agent in the three lower worlds. So we will have to consider a technique which will do three things, we are told. It will bring illumination through the evocation of the will, our first aspect of divinity. Now, DK will explain how the aspects are interplaying here. It's as if the three vertices of the triangle are chasing each other. One chases two, two chases three, three chases one. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Bring imagination through the evocation of love, second aspect, or sentient response to the world's soul. Love. The evocation of love will bring in the imagination, which will reveal relationship, right? So imagination will reveal relationship, and then bring inspiration through the evocation of the intelligence, the third aspect. Now, I think this is going to be the place where we will stop. We may review here when we start again, but this is the end of techniques of fusion and duality, number 1. And we're on page EP2, page 384. And we'll begin with techniques of fusion and duality, number 2, EP2, page 384. And why don't we do the great invocation? When I come back to this, probably what I'll do is go over these a little bit. He's going to explain how illumination is really a second-rate quality, illumination is second-rate quality, imagination a third-rate quality, inspiration a first-rate quality. And he'll show, therefore, how point number 1 is related to point 2, point 2 to point 3, and point 3 to point 1. I'm speaking of the vertices of the interactive triangle of the first, second, and third ray, will, love, and intelligence. There's even a fusion going on within this foundational triangle, as the various points are each related to the next. So let's let's do the great invocation together. Right. I think, yeah, let's do that. And I wonder if I have my pitch pipe. If I had perfect pitch like my friend Daniel Krimenacher, I'd be in good shape. Everybody in the worldwide group, they have so many different gifts to offer. And when you put it all together, then you have what Master Moria calls the evident transfiguration. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Okay, friends, we'll go on with this fascinating section and try to understand the continuity between the techniques of integration, techniques of fusion, and techniques of duality, or maybe it should just be the singular, divided into different parts. We'll see you soon. Take care.